Hello, this is Ruslan Belov with you. Well, yesterday, Putin announced that a decision has been made to create a buffer zone around the regions bordering Ukraine. Accordingly, the buffer zone will be established in the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv regions. But we'll talk more about that in detail today. I'll show you everything on the map. So let's not waste time and get right to the frontline updates. Let's open the map. All right, friends, for several days, the pace of advance was slow. To be precise, it was during the past 3 days. The rate ranged between 7 to 10 square kilometers per day. And once again, the Ukrainian armed forces suffered a collapse on 2 sectors. We have some very good numbers to look at here. In just 1 day, 39 square kilometers came under our control. So let's go over it step by step. But first, a few words about the border areas. Once again, I'll repeat, yesterday, Putin said the decision was made to create a buffer zone. He was referring to the Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk regions. Consequently, the buffer zone will be in Kharkiv, and it's already partially established there. But as you can see, if we follow the border, there's still a long stretch of unprotected border. So there's a lot of work to do. Also, in the Sumy region, everything is still in progress. As of now, the maximum depth of the Russian military's advance is 11 kilometers. And the main thing to highlight is that it also concerns the Chernihiv region. Now here, nothing is yet under our control. Yes, you see on the map, it's shaded, but shaded as a grey zone. 3 border villages, Moravy, Novosyolka, and Kolos. There are no Russian troops there, and no Ukrainian forces either. So given Putin's statement, we should expect the army to enter new regions soon, specifically the Chernihiv region. Why did Putin suddenly announce this yesterday? Well, because the Ukrainian armed forces' attacks on northern Russian regions haven't stopped. Just the day before yesterday, a sabotage group tried to break through to Bryansk. I told you about that. And yesterday, the Ukrainians again attempted to infiltrate the Kursk region. The attack happened in this area. I was in touch with the fighters all evening. It was very intense, according to them, very tough. In the end, the attack was repelled, enemy equipment and weapons were captured, and a significant number of Ukrainian troops were killed. The most important thing is that they were held back. And it's exactly because of such actions, these provocations, these attempts, that the decision has been made to push the Ukrainian armed forces away from the border entirely. The only question is how deep. And I don't have an answer to that question. I don't know. But at least 10 to 15 kilometers no less, because anything less would make the buffer zone meaningless. All right, now let's get to the frontline advances. Yesterday there was a major Ukrainian collapse in 1 sector. But before we get to that, we need to talk about the advance in Vchansk. Yes, you heard me right, in Vchansk. In a stagnant area that hasn't moved for months, we managed to make some progress yesterday. Specifically, we advanced from Stepnaya Street to Pesky Street, clearing and taking control of 4 streets along the way. Now, if you just look at the numbers, it might not seem impressive, an advance of 900 meters. But first of all, it's in an urban setting. And second, this is Vchansk, so under those circumstances, the result is more than impressive. As I said earlier, the Ukrainian armed forces suffered another major collapse yesterday. Can you guess where? Of course, in the Konstantinovka area, specifically in the pocket between Mirnograd and Toretsk. Here, take a look. This red dotted line is the front line from a day ago, and this is what is now under our control. And the numbers here are impressive. If we look at the eastern breakthrough, the advance along and near the road to Romanovka from the south totaled 5 kilometers, and the total width of the advance was 4.5 kilometers. In addition to the actual advance, the entire southern and eastern part of Stara Nikolaevka came under our control. The Ukrainian armed forces are only holding the northern part of the village. Also, they're still in some utility buildings over here, but I don't think they'll be able to hold the remaining 20% of the village for long. Plus, there's another sector where they suffered a collapse, from Alexandropol eastward. Here, the advance was 3.5 kilometers. And what's important isn't just that the front has moved several kilometers away from Alexandropol, meaning the village is now safe from counterattacks. The key point is that the village of Zaria is now squeezed from 2 sides, And if Stara Nikolaevka is taken, and it will be, then Zaria will be surrounded from 3 sides. At the moment, the distance from Romanovka to Zaria is 2.3 kilometers, from current positions just 1.5 kilometers, and from the south 2.7 kilometers. Under such conditions, the Ukrainian forces won't be able to hold Zaria for long. It's important to understand that Zaria isn't just a village. It's a fortified position in the overall defensive line. So losing this position will be very costly for the Ukrainian armed forces. In fact, if they lose ground here, it will immediately trigger a further collapse of 5 to 6 kilometers, all the way to the defensive line running through Yablanvka, Alexander Kalinov, and Katerinovka. But you know they're having problems there too. Yesterday, for example, there was another advance, 1 kilometer from Novoalenovka, directly toward Yablanvka. And even according to Ukrainian reports, our forces have already entered the eastern outskirts of the village, although that's not shown on the maps here. But again, they wouldn't lie, right? Or exaggerate, or credit our forces with victories. They're writing that we've already entered the eastern part of Yablanvka. Altogether, just in this pocket between Mirnograd and Toretsk, 22.5 square kilometers came under our control yesterday. But things aren't looking much better for the Ukrainian side on the eastern flank of Mirnograd either. While there weren't any massive breakthroughs here, there were numerous small and medium-sized ones. Just take a look. The largest advance of 3 kilometers was recorded to the northeast of Novaya Poltavka. Thanks to this push, our forces managed to approach both Popov Yar and Poltavka very closely. Only about 1 kilometer remains to reach each village, just a single leap away. And I've already explained before what the loss of these villages would mean for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU. It threatens an approach to Konstantinovka from the west, because once Poltavka is taken, the movement will head toward Rusin Yar and from there to all the western outskirts of Konstantinovka. And note this, it's a fact that continues to amaze me. The AFU command is throwing soldiers and reserves into pointless and doomed attacks on the Kursk region instead of plugging holes here, where their front is literally cracking. Just to give you a sense of it. Let's switch to another map, and I'll show you. Look, this is where the line of contact, LOC, was 20 days ago. And here is the huge area they've lost in just one section from Mirnograd to Toretsk. To give you an idea, just in this sector alone, the advance for May totals around 140 square kilometers. But the AFU command is so eager to recapture even a couple of villages in the Kursk region that despite the collapse of their front lines, and that's exactly what it is, a collapse, they continue burning through reserves near Tyotkino and Novi Mir. Just yesterday, 10 square kilometers came under our control on the eastern flank of Mirnograd. Let's also add the advance in the pocket between Mirnograd and Toretsk, where 22.5 square kilometers were taken. So that gives us over 32 square kilometers of gains just in that sector, in a single day. And the AFU is not only failing there. In the Otradoi area too, their lines are faltering. Fighting for Bogatyr had just ended, and now battles have started for Otradoi. Our forces managed to gain a foothold on the southern outskirts of the village, although, according to AFU reports, a third of the village is already under our control. Maybe that's an exaggeration born of panic, so let's stick to what this map confirms. It's certain we've entered and held the southern outskirts, and fighting is ongoing. Also, the AFU has problems further south near Zelonoi Pole and Novapole. While they're still holding on to Novapole, they're losing Zelonoi Pole. Yesterday alone, we advanced 3 kilometers there and took control of both the northern and central parts of the village. The southern part was already under our control. So, as you can see on the map, we now control more than half of Zelonoi Pole. In Novapole itself, there was no progress yesterday. Fighting is ongoing inside the village. But north of Novoselka, we also took over additional field areas, totaling 2 square kilometers. In total, yesterday's advance amounted to 39.65 square kilometers. In essence, rounding up, that's 40 square kilometers, a more than solid result. It's the third best day in May, and in fact, these are the kind of figures we haven't seen since March-April 2022. That's why, despite pressure from Europe, the US and others, our side rejected calls to cease fire for 30 to 60 days. The front is advancing, and negotiations will proceed in parallel. Now that's all for today on the frontline situation. A few words about politics. Statement by Dmitry Peskov. There are no concrete agreements on the next rounds of negotiations for a Ukrainian settlement. There have been no agreements about holding talks in the Vatican. Putin still plans to visit Donetsk and Luhansk, and those plans will be fulfilled over time. Reports in some media about details of a Putin-Trump conversation citing the US president contrast with what is known in Moscow. Kyiv is issuing a new ultimatum, wrote Andriy Yermak, head of the Kyiv office. Ukraine demands that the conditions for a prisoner exchange with Russia be agreed upon first, and only then the venue for a new round of talks. Our position is clear, he said. The first step should be an agreement to exchange prisoners on a 1,000 for 1,000 basis. The second step, determining the location of the next meeting with representatives of the Russian Federation. Zalinski is stalling. He believes time is on his side. He thinks he just needs to hold out until September, when the US budget is adopted, at which point the anti-Trump majority in the Senate and House will demand continued funding and arms supplies for Ukraine in exchange for supporting the budget, writes Oleg Tsaryov. An even more desirable outcome for Zelensky would be to hang on until November 3, 2026, when elections for the US House and Senate take place. If Trump hasn't achieved any major breakthroughs by then, and his approval rating remains modest, Republicans might lose their majority, if not in both chambers, then at least in one. In that case, Democrats could use Congress to dictate terms to Trump about continuing the war in Ukraine. The Americans have decided to publicly remind Zelensky that they always have leverage over him and his team. If they suddenly want to publicly torpedo Trump again, that's what Zelensky's globalist sponsors are demanding, writes the Telegram channel Legitimny. It's clear all of our aid will be scrutinized. We have an Inspector General and a Special Inspector General for this specific matter who will be reviewing all expenses. If we ever uncover illegal appropriation or manipulation, we will certainly deal with it, said Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Congress. We've long been hearing from insiders that an unofficial audit is underway of US military and financial aid to Ukraine. Many of our sources believe Trump will accuse the Biden administration of underpricing military hardware, missiles, ammunition, etc., which means Kyiv may have to pay more. Overall, the AFU is facing a growing internal crisis, which is only going to get worse. The problem is that the number of experienced and motivated soldiers on the front lines is shrinking. At some point, this will lead to a massive collapse of the front, because endless mobilization has turned the AFU into a crowd. There may be many soldiers, but the quality is dropping fast and will soon become extremely low, leading to disaster. Bankova, the presidential office, knows all this, but as usual, they don't want to solve the problem and won't, reports Legitimny. And that's all for today's frontline and political overview. As always, thank you for staying informed and thinking critically. The situation is evolving rapidly, both on the battlefield and in the political arena, and we'll continue to follow it closely. Stay sharp, stay grounded, and don't let the noise drown out the facts. Until next time, take care and see you in the next update.